It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to start off thanking Professor Fernandez and all the people associated with the center who've helped out, Kate Goldman and James Green and Professor Lewis. And I'm really happy that you're having something to eat, because that sort of means there's something good happened here today. I hope that the talk will also give us some stuff to think about. Are you hearing me without the mic?
No, you need to, because they're taping it.
Oh, okay. So I need to sort of lean over. Or,
It should be. The volume should be increased, but
okay.
They're on it.
Just okay. Oh, that sounds a little. I would raise your hand if yeah. I can't say raise your hand if you don't hear. But if
it's great now.
yeah, if everybody hears that, that's great. So, just for those of you who have to leave early, I wanted to sort of tell you a little bit about the conclusion of what I mean by leadership tips from the Canela. I was thinking about the lamentable distance between the sort of tasks that we have as a society and the leadership that we have to get us there. And it made me want to think of doing some sort of old-fashioned ethnographic comparison and think about leadership from the point of view of the people that I've been working with over the past about 15 years. And so the analysis, or what I think I have to tell, I think two important things to note. One is that it's really not from the point of view of leaders. It's not like, who was that, Jack Welch, who was head of GM or something, and, be a good listener and fire half the workforce and do, whatever leaders do. It's more about what the Canela feel they need to do to create leaders, and the importance that they give this. And what's sort of thrilling to me is how much thought that they have actually given to this. How much, once I started working with the material, I realized how much of what I had to say was transmitting what Canela themselves thought about the issue of leaders and about society in general, and their theories of social motivation, and how much they use them, and how historically they've developed all of these institutions that involve leaders to confront specific problems. And so maybe the first lesson is that what the Canela do is to constantly create new forms of organization that engage with the world in a way that they find to be necessary, and how leadership is part of those new forms. But I think that's a little contrary to the way most of us think about tribal peoples or traditional peoples, and I'll get to talk a little bit more about the specifics in a bit. I also am aware that probably most of the people in this room aren't anthropologists, and we were talking about the issue of disciplinarity and method and what kinds of context would make it most vivid for you. So I thought I would just start out with a little film clip that would show you where we are in sort of geographically, and particularly the part that competition plays in this society. So we'll see the film clip, then I'll sort of give you a background of who are these people. At one point in the middle of the film, I think I won't stop, but one of the chiefs runs by, and you'll notice that you won't notice that the chief ran by, because he's indistinguishable from everyone else, right? I was talking with Estevão, and at least those of us who study Amazonian anthropology are really have heard of these sort of mythical log races, these people who are divided, very complex social organization, And one of the things that they do is set up competitions between one another. In fact, there is no overarching office that encompasses the group as a whole. That what the competition in some sense is what binds them together through their moiety organization. That is kinship and competition, but no governing structure, no authority structure, no one who can speak for the group as a whole. So let's look at the log race, and afterwards, if there's any questions, we can talk about that. I want you to notice that, I mean, we'll see two groups. This is the place where the Canela live in a state called Maranhão, Brazil, which is the eastern fringes. It's a northeastern Brazilian state, sort of right between the elbow of the Amazon and the coastal northeast. And this is the interior of that state in an area that Brazilians call Chapada, or Chapadão, or savanna. We might call it savanna. The soil is sandy, and it's very hot and dry a lot of the time. And of course, that doesn't necessarily come across through the film. So let's look at some log racing. There's the chief sort of limping along there. So they're all stunningly fit, right? And they're good looking and impressive, right? And they get that way because of the regimen, right? That's imposed on young people. Aside from these sort of big log races, they'll race with bigger logs of different sizes. They'll also have relay races, what they call flat races, like sprints, and other sorts of competitive games. And you saw that there's always two, right? There were two groups. There's always two groups, and within the two groups, there's always actually also males and females that is, each form of social organization is modeled on sort of a dual form that includes its opposite. And this is, for those of us who have studied anthropology, this is what a moiety system looks like. Uh, and And here, what's different from this moiety system from other moiety systems is this is composed of groups of people of different ages, and so there's no marriage involved. You know, it's sort of the classical literature often talks about moieties as primarily regulating marriage, right? They're exogamous. You trade with your partner, and that creates integration, right? So the question I think that I want to ask you, or I want you to think about, is how do you take this sort of organization and form leaders from it? How do you take a competitive situation in which winners, it's a genuinely competitive situation. There's winners and losers. I'm in one of these moieties, the loser moiety, that literally the whole time I was in the field never won a single race, and yet we kept racing. There's no sense of fair play. I mean, people will cheat, they'll do anything to win, and that the outcome is not absolutely certain, but there's lots of ways you can affect the outcome of these races. Let one of the logs soak in water overnight, and then lay them out as if both logs were the same. Cut ridges that are different, and make it more difficult to transport. So it's a really curious situation, right? For how then does one reproduce a situation in which initiatives can be taken on behalf of people, right, out of this competitive situation. And I'll tell you what I think the answer is, and then we'll sort of look at the material. And I know one of the difficulties I have in sort of a talk like this is when you're thinking abstractly about social organization and social theory, that the images don't necessarily match what they don't show the sorts of abstractions that you're often trying to communicate. But I will try to show you some material that will help us think through some of these things together and imagine a very different society, right? And the issues that they have with creating and sustaining leadership in order to reproduce the group as a whole, right? And so we need to switch gears. I'm going to put up a PowerPoint, show you where we're located, and tell you a little bit more about the Canela. So I think our computer person. So I want to get off my computer and put. Well, let's see. Maybe. Hold on. Maybe I can just stay on my computer.
Want to go back to this?
Yeah. Can we do that? Okay. So we don't need to see this film now. But we do need to see this.
You go to slideshow and then begin slideshow.
Right. Here we are. Slideshow. Okay. So. When I started in anthropology, the study of Jay-speaking peoples in South America was very much in vogue, and since then, fortunately, now we know lots of other kinds of peoples, and the Jay may not be so familiar any longer for most of us, but there's lots of different Jay-speaking peoples over this sort of part of of central Brazil, an area that was called Central Brazil. And they all share a lot of similarities, but they're also different. The Canela are different in the sense that they represent the second largest unified indigenous village in Brazil, right? Over 2,000 people. And so it's a lot of people. And in an environment that you see, it's not really hospitable, right? So they have to be well organized, and they have to go over wide distances and really divide up the work and bring things back to the center where they can sort of undertake their life. So they're super mobile, right? And they're super complicated, but one of the things that they have that other J peoples don't have is an assignment that one of the moieties actually is superior to the other moieties and regulates not resources, but time or ritual, right? So we're beginning to see the first part of this puzzle, right? That what government does, or what politics are about, or what leadership is called on to manage, is not resources, right? At least not directly, right? And in fact, I'll show you, well, let's see, I think there's a little arrow will come up that shows you where we are. We're here in Maranhão. And the villages, like most J-speaking villages, are either circular or semicircular. They're quite beautiful, quite organized, and this was taken in 1975. Of course, it's much bigger now and a little messier, and the houses have spread out, but still conceptually they're working in a circle, and we'll see a lot of the pictures take place in the middle of that circle. You can also see that they're built at the triangle of two watercourses, and in this part of, so here's one of the streams, and there's another stream behind this green foliage. I put this, I was looking through it. I don't know if you can see what's on this guy's chest, written there. It says cultura, or culture. He's written it, which is, and he's written it in body paint. I really wish I wish you could see it. But the point is, I put it there to remind us that even though the things that we're looking at seem very perhaps different, or they're not different because of ignorance about the way that Brazilians are, in the wider world are doing things, that the effort to maintain these sorts of social forms is very conscious and is the object of discussion. I mean, really what the elders do, what the powerful moiety does, is they talk about how to maintain ritual. And they talk about how to organize the time sequence of ritual. And everything else that we'll see about the emergence of leadership emerges from the sequence of ritual activities. So you have a society in which governance, there is no common property. There is no centralization of resources and then redistribution of resources. What there is a form of moiety organization that's held together by its opposite through competition. And the governing, the elders meet in the middle of the plaza, and they talk about how to organize ritual. And in order to organize ritual, you have to determine not only what ritual is being held, but also who's going to do the work, right? And it's through the assignment of this sort of work that the processes that I'm identifying as the formation of leaders actually comes into being. So in Brazil, Marshall Sahlins is super, the anthropologist Marshall Sahlins is super popular in Brazil. And about 20 years ago, Marshall Sahlins, he published an article in the Annual Review of Anthropology talking about how we need to see culture now as a project rather than the way we've been looking at it previously. And many of the peoples in Brazil have embraced that idea. So what they've reified culture, they've made culture or their law precisely this ritual system. This is what they're interested in conserving. This is what they're interested in working on as a focus of their political life. So one of the things that we saw the racing, and if you're a good racer, you get recognized, and so you see these. This is for singing, right? The previous one's for race. This is for singing. This woman wanted a picture taken. She's very proud of her ornament that she received for being exemplary singer. So that's the other thing that the council does, right? Is acknowledges exemplary behavior, and sort of if we think about the second sort of aspect of creation of leadership, it's how to make this exemplary behavior into behavior that works for the benefit of everybody. And the way to do this is not by putting them in leadership positions. It's through festival sponsorship. Let's see if. So we have to understand a little bit about how these groups are set up, right? How are the moieties reproduced? How are they set up? And I've spoken rather abstractly about the upper moiety, or the moiety that's in charge, or the council of elders. Well, here they are. Now we're in the center of the village, and we're looking at the different groups of the moiety sitting in their sitting position, because the moieties are composed of people of different ages, layers of different ages. So it's a fantastic system, and in some ways it's like one of the difficulties of presenting the analysis is that the ethnographic facts are so complex and so unfamiliar that if you bypass the facts, then you can't see what's happening. If you engage with the facts, they tend to overwhelm, right, understanding. So I know I'm walking a fine line, talking about moieties and age sets and all of these things that aren't part of most of our sort of mental equipment or understanding, and yet it's through the formation of these age groups that are part of the moieties that this all comes into being, and a village of over 2,000 people can be maintained. So here's a formal shot of this group, with the exception of I said every group has to be paired with its opposite. In this case, the opposite is this guy who we saw in the film, who is the chief of the tribe. But the chief of the tribe deals with external matters rather than organizing the ritual time and responsibilities. And you see he's a little bit plainer. He doesn't have the moiety markings. And the absolute sort of main leader of this rather large group of people is hard to detect in this picture, right? There's no specific emblem of office or anything like this. It's that guy right there. So I put this slide in, not because you'll be able to see the details, but because this is an indigenous rendering of their social organization. And the Canela ritual time and the groups that come to the fore at different ritual moments. And it's beyond complex, right? It requires constant consultation, checking, rechecking. There's like 50 or 60 terms here that represent specific parts of the ritual year and the groups that are associated with that ritual year. And this was done by a Canela person just for his own. He was learning to write and going to school to learn to be a teacher, and he decided to write everything down that he knew about his own social organization. He realized he didn't know everything, and he had to go and actually talk to lots and lots of people. So that's the other aspect, that people have to constantly meet to figure out what should be going on, because no one has all of the knowledge in their head. When I got there, they welcomed me because they've worked with anthropologists over many decades. And they said, Bill, we're happy that you're here, but you'll have to stay at least 13 years before you can understand everything that we do here. And I thought that was a good deal. I sort of wish I'd made the bargain, I'll just stay 13 years. But I think, in fact, I wouldn't have, at the end of 13 years, I would have had to sign up for another 13 years. It's amazingly complex, and one of the things that people take pride in is this complexity and how nobody knows everything.
My question, I was thinking of it now, of course, I might forget. These big recent fires in Brazil, these huge fires. Do you happen to know if any people or tribes or anybody were burned out or anything like that, or just a forest?
Oh yeah. Well, villages particularly in the eastern, like Guajajara people and group that Bill Ballet studies. There have been some villages that have been affected. And I would assume also in the Xingu region, and the effects have been devastating of the fire. So even if a village hasn't been burned directly, if the area in which the people rely for subsistence has been burned, that makes the village location inviable, right? Because all these people occupy not just a village, but a territory from which they get their sustenance. Okay, so I just wanted to put some writing in here so that we would sort of remember where we were in the midst of all this complexity. The Canela ritual system leverages their ranking to foster a need for extra community engagement by higher ranked households. So, people with those ornaments that have been awarded for racing, for singing, for other competitive activities, we'll see. Those people who have been given special, are often those people are given special office in the initiation of age sets. And both men and women are, even though women don't form age sets, they're also given a lot of honors, and we'll see some pictures. So people compete, and they're if we remember, there was a classic description of an age initiation associated with subordination of females, written by Godelier, right? The Making of Great Men. And if you think about the fact that initiation ceremonies do much more than just initiate youth into whatever youthhood, or make people mature, make them fully social people, they're also critical moments in which social differentiation can be created. And it's at this moment in the initiation ritual, which takes place actually over an extended period of time, that leaders are taken, and I think we need a word for it, and it's the word for it would be the opposite of subordination, right? So let's call them ordained. There's a process of ordination going on that lifts leaders up at the same time that their age sets are being formed. But look at the context. Look at how, I mean, when I was going through the material, and I have lots and lots of pictures, how happy people are exercising their youth and vitality and experiencing it together, right? Picture after picture just showed, well, here's young boys, right, being socialized into this joyful activity. It's out of this experience, right, of competition that age sets are formed and leaders are ordained. And here I'll probably just try to keep going, so sort of quickly from here on out to get to the conclusion. But here's the start of it all, right? They're painted, they're taken out of their households, and they're deposited in files in the plaza center. Here's later in the same ceremony, these little unformed human sort of boys are starting their journey. Well, they'll be taken away from the households in which they've been nurtured, and they'll be incarcerated or sequestered in the initiation house for many, many months, and they will be disciplined in that house, and they will be yanked out at all hours of day and night and doused with cold water by their sisters, and they'll experience it as both horrifying and also it will create the most important bonds that they will experience throughout their lifetime. Because once the age sets are formed, they're formed for life, right? So this group here, 50 years down the road, will be like 3 or 4 old guys sitting together, knowing that you know the end of the age set is approaching, and these young boys will sort of push their forerunning age sets up a level. So it not only is an initiation for these boys, but it changes the status of everybody in this complicated age set system. Here they are being marched off. Here's a later phase about a month later. There's always lots of activities that it involved and focused on women as well. I didn't want to leave those out. Although they're not forming age sets, they do sing in a line, provide the chorus every night for the village. And here she's hunting boys actually with an arrow that's tipped so it won't actually kill them, but everybody will take great enjoyment. Here's another analogous ceremony in which the girls are attacking men with oranges, and it gets pretty ferocious. Although again, there's a great deal of joy here. Here's the same initiation just about 3 months down the road, where now they're arranged in files, and each boy is asked to sing, and the singer will get an award. It's a rather painful position to maintain, but they all sing the same song. It's called Ayuk, and for those boys that are too tiny, there'll be a surrogate behind them. They're all protected. Here, as in all the other, it wasn't clear, but their sisters or close relatives always protect them from the spirits when they're arrayed like this. This is 2 or 3 years later, where yet another stage of the initiation ceremony. And you can see that there's a female included, right, a girl included, because no kind of organization is formed that doesn't include its opposite, right? And again, it's exciting. So maybe I think I can sort of skip to a conclusion that I think may not be too anticlimactic. But when anthropologists write about leadership in the Amazon and in other places too, it's often done in sort of ironic or gay vein that it's more trouble than it's worth. Or there was a famous article, for those of you who are like fans of 50s fiction, What Makes Sammy Run was about a guy who reaches the top of the entertainment industry and finds himself all alone in his mansion, all his sort of, think about Trump, right? But I mean, sort of, you have like a wonderfly appointed house and lots of stuff, but the effort to get there was not worth it, right? That's not what happens here, right? The sort of ironic, ambitious leader who gets what he wants, gets the influence, gets, more stuff, but finds it all to sort of be ashes in flowing through his hands. In fact, both things happen, but not in the way that has just been laid out. That the other part, or this would be, I guess, my part number 3 of forming leadership, is that what makes leaders effective in leveraging their effort for group activity is that they become dependent on the esteem that the age set extends them, right, as a part of the whole initiation, right? So, in effect, the elders have bet on, the contemporaneous initiates have bet on the leadership qualities of the person that's elevated. And what is tragic and ironic is I mean, this sort of system obviously has its limitations. It can be successful or it can fail. When it fails, you have people who are leaders, who are acknowledged as leaders, and yet have no ability to actually lead or get things done or to leverage their organizational position into collective activities for the benefit of the group. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why I started thinking so carefully about this issue. And I think a lot of these people end up working with anthropologists because they know a lot and they're not actually leading stuff. But this guy was a file leader. He was the guy in the head of the initiation sort of line, and one of its leadership team. They have wonderful names, but in the end, he proved to be sort of a feckless, leader in terms of his ability to appeal to the well-being of collective well-being, to be entrepreneurial, to have ideas about what needed to be done to respond to the needs that existed, and so. Leaders continue to enjoy their office throughout their lives, but they don't continue to enjoy the esteem that goes with the office unless they actually do the work. And so age sets can be relatively more or less successful, and people will tell you. And if an age set is not particularly successful at getting things done together, then they'll often subordinate their activities to another age set whose leader is more effective. I just wanted to say, just because we're talking politics, and I think probably there's interest in Brazil here, and just that in addition to all this other stuff that I've been talking about going on in the village, there's, these folks like run for office outside and get elected sometimes. This is my relative here who has run for like city council and a number of times. He was elected once, but you notice each time he runs from a different party. And there's never an uncontested, that is, the Canela never get together behind one candidate, right? As you might expect, right? Given what we've talked about. So there's always other Canela on the ballot running against one another. And as you might expect, that the oppositions are almost always in terms of moiety line. I also wanted to show this because you can, sometimes age sets more recently have become active politically in advocating for reforms in the region, right, rather than just working in the village. And here's a group of Gavião, another closely related group that they're working. They're demonstrating on the issue of roads, and again, the form that this demonstration took was the age set as a whole going into the city, having the banners made, and participating in the protest. And so that's different than the other sorts of indigenous protests that you will often see in Brazil today, where many, many different ethnic groups come together and sort of there's an advocacy for issues that affect many, many different groups. So by way of conclusion, and with apologies for all of the ethnographic details. I guess what this material does for me, and I'm still obviously working through it to some extent, is it allows us to see an alternative to the leadership as the product of an ambition, right? Someone who wants to, or is particularly persuasive, or someone who wants to sort of exercise influence. Instead, we see that people are pushed up, they're ordinated at the same time that their relations with others are defined. And they're always defined mutually in the sense that the identity of the age set is always encapsulated just by the offices. There's 4 ritual offices associated with each age set. They talk about the names of the individuals who occupy those offices rather than the offices themselves. And under these conditions, what happens is that the dependency of the leaders, right, on the age set organizations for their sort of very definition creates a situation in which, in some ways, they're more dependent on maintaining a following for their psychological well-being, for their sort of for their ability to hold their head up and walk around and be accepted socially, and that fits very well with what we know about Amazonian leadership. That it's often experiences very constraining, more trouble than it's worth. But I think here what we're also seeing is that it's both society and its leadership are being formed in relationship to one another in ways that we wouldn't be able to identify unless we actually got down in the weeds and look at what the Canela do and look at the principles that they use to form the groups that they actually use to do what they do. So let me stop there, and if there's any questions, I'd be delighted to take them. Thank you. Well, here, why don't you do?
No, you.
I mean, I figure everybody's equal, so let's start here, right?
What? You talked about when they get there and then they've got to be responding to sort of the needs of the situation. I may have missed something, but what do they actually do?
So there's ritual obligations, right? What you do when you're actually walking in a file or galvanizing people to run a race or whatever. But what they do that's really important for their political authority is to work for individual households that need it, to initiate common projects, to use their collective following to project power outside the village. So that at various times in Canela history, they've many of us are familiar with this idea of coronelismo, right? The idea of these backland colonels. Well, some of the age set leaders actually become something like a backland colonel. They respond, they're economic entrepreneurs. They're given military titles, coronel or major or whatever, and they through that activity accrue stuff that then gets funneled back to the tribe through their sponsorship of rituals, right? And so if you think of them as in part a service, they can transform the aid sets into sort of a service organization. But I think of it in terms of creating a sort of common, like something like a commons. That is, once you're actually able to share information and activity, certain kinds of things become available to you, like you can do different sorts of agriculture that some of which you can sell, like cotton. One of these guys, old Canela colonels in the 1890s, he made a deal and he sold cotton in San Luis. So those are the sorts of activities that you can do if you leverage your following in, through your leadership. So there's no list of things that leaders do. What they have to do is produce. They have to generate activity that benefits others in some way, but always through benefiting sort of specific projects rather than.
But not always ritual related or something like that.
No, of course not.
I see, okay.
That's the point. Yes, that you have to take, even though you are socialized and recognized for the sorts of things that would contribute to ritual. In fact, that's not what the content of your political activity or leadership consists of. Yes, I think that was helpful for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have two questions, but I need to ask a backup question because I'm not clear. There are just 2,000 Canela and they're only in one community?
So yes, actually there's more than 2,000 now, but that's a recent denomination. I won't go, their neighboring peoples that are very similar culturally have fragmented or fissioned into many, many different smaller communities. So this is an exceptionally big community. Yeah.
But it has a notion of its internal cohesion in terms of an entity which sees itself different from other entities.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So the municipality that people are running in the elections for councilperson Vereador, this is they're living in a reservation, or they just have land claims?
They have a reservation.
And so and the municipality is the
It's about
municipality that
8,400 people. So
which is people Canela and other people who are in that area.
Right.
So they're disputing with non-indigenous peoples access to resources of the state or the federal government that are channeled through okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to figure out, it seemed like you were making an argument of an alternative form of leadership and how people structure a society. But it almost inferring that this was something we could learn from this for how other peoples could do that. And if that were the case, I was kind of going to question that. It looks like you respond immediately no, because it seems that it's a logical thing for us, any small group, if we were to study a group of, I don't know, hippies in upstate New York in the 70s who had a large commune and how they functioned very differently from the society as a whole, because they're very isolated from the society as a whole in a lot of ways, even though they're interacting in terms of internal structures of functioning and how that interrelates to a larger polis.
Right. So I think I understand your question, and I'm not suggesting that this is a form that we could all sort of emulate, but it does seem to me at some level to argue for a kind of understanding of differentiated citizenship or something that the Canela don't, in order for them to remain Canela, the organization, they can't, they don't, and they shouldn't be expected to articulate with, forms of economic production, responsibilities of citizenship, and things like this in the same way that other people are. I think that, I wrestle with that, because it seems to me that when we, as academics, we pose this, then we become programmatic, right? Or we think it becomes sort of an abstract issue of citizenship, and if that's where you're going. Whereas I think what happens on the ground is that ever since 1865, when the office of chief, 1835, when the office of chief was sort of invented by the Canela to differentiate themselves from some of these other ritual positions. In fact, they fit into the local sort of relations and all kinds of things happen that we don't foresee or that aren't sort of written out in terms of rights and responsibilities. That is, people learn to live together in ways that are genuinely sort of, they make adjustments to the different ways of life, and their life is enhanced by it. I mean, it's fantastic to see some of the things that go on between Canela and non-Canela in the region, precisely because they don't all have the same expectations that they'll do the same thing or they're responsible for the same sorts of thing. So I'm not sure if that's where your question was coming from.
It was an open-ended question. It was open-ended.
Okay. Yeah.
I found this fascinating, and I'm not an anthropologist, but I think this is really interesting. But I'm also concerned about, or trying to understand how these indigenous people survive or will continue to survive under the present government. I've heard some comments by the president that were not particularly welcoming of indigenous people, welcoming of any people really. But you know, I'm just concerned, and I'm wondering if anthropologists are concerned how these people will continue to survive.
So I think the answer to that question may lie at the federal level, some change in federal policy. But the way they've managed to survive and even thrive till now is in the interstices of the existing sorts of power relations in that part of Brazil. And so power has always been very rural based. You have big rural, powerful rural people whose power extrudes into the centers of the town. And that actually creates a situation in which the Canela are able to play one party off of another, sometimes come to the fore in their own right, other times receding a little bit, to be a little bit more deferential to the powers that exist. But I think we should be concerned, but it's also amazing to me how much social innovation the Canela have actually engaged in order to, for example, when there were many splits between indigenous people, they invented a status of internal diplomat for a different tribe. And then once they split and came back together themselves, they invented a new office of the ceremonial chief of the whole tribe, which in fact is deployed, ritually in a particular circumstance in which they play, there's a mock battle that's, so yes, I think we should be concerned. I also think that they could well outlast, Providence or whatever. Who knows? Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you once more, Professor Bill. And thank you all. If you want to say any final words.
Well, I think the forbearance of the people who have been here and listened, and I find this really difficult to present. So I imagine that you had some difficulty sort of grasping all of the forest from the trees, and so I recognize the difficulty, and I appreciate it. Thank you.